Hey everybody, it's Sam with Paranormal Review, and today we are reviewing the new Ghost Hunters, Season 1, Episode 4, The Cursed Castle. It aired in October 2nd of 2019, and I am watching the special episode of Access Granted that has some bonus clips in it. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about those as we go. Was a little shocked when I found out exactly what we were going to be investigating with the new Ghost Hunters team. With it being Landau's Mohegan Castle in Loudonville, Ohio. It is about 90 miles, 90 minutes southwest of Cleveland when I looked it up. It appears to be an extremely nice place in a nice area of town. I think if it wasn't haunted and I wasn't chicken, then I definitely may want to take off and go there, just because it's pretty cute, you know? So I was kind of excited to see what this episode was actually, kind of going to bring us. I was looking forward to it because after our last episode, when we went to, I believe it was Tony's house, wasn't it? The lady in the window? But anyway, our last episode, I was kind of thinking, well, let's give Ghost Hunters a break a little while. We've got some new series that we probably need to concentrate on that we haven't even tried. We need to, people are writing in and saying we need to do the Dead Files. We need to do Kindred Spirits. And I'll be honest with you, I came across where I put up news and live interviews and live investigations and everything like that on Paranormal Review Facebook page. I try to put some of them up on Paranormal Review's Twitter page, but a lot of people, they are doing Facebook Live investigations now, and so they don't go up on Twitter really well. It almost seems like a lot of people either like to go Facebook Live or they like to do Periscope on Twitter. They don't do them both. And so you'll find a lot of different news articles and investigations and talks. Demonology is doing talks pretty much every Monday now. And I'm going to butcher his last name, but it's James Anoit, I believe. And Carl Johnson from The Conjuring House and from Ghost Hunters, the first couple seasons. And they are doing talks about demonology. And some of those have really been interesting. So I encourage you to check out Paranormal Review's Facebook page or our Twitter page. As always, you can write me at paranormalreviewpod@gmail.com. Yes, that's singular. paranormalreviewpod@gmail.com. But anyway, I was posting an article that had been written by Brandon Alvis, who is one of the new members of the new Ghost Hunters, and he was talking about using some new tech. And he just happened to mention that in episode 4 is when they started to kind of start using that. And that piqued my interest. That's the reason why you're getting a new Ghost Hunters paranormal review, because I sat down and I really wanted to watch it and see what kind of new tech he was talking about, what it could do, if it made sense, and if I thought maybe that it was legitimate. I'm going to be real honest with you. Everything that I have read that Brandon Alvis has written, when I hear him on podcasts or I see him on Twitter, he seems to make sense. I think that he comes across as very smart. And like I said, the article, I believe he didn't actually write the article. He was being interviewed, and he just made the comment that, around episode 4, they started using some new tech, and I've seen where he's already made comments that in season 2 that they do away with some of the tech that other paranormal shows are using because they don't believe that it works. They believe that it gives some false positives. And that has really impressed me. So I hit the DVR button. And I said, I really want to watch this. This new team intrigues me and has since the very first episode. I believe Grant Wilson has put together an interesting group of different backgrounds that I don't know that they're exactly there yet, but when they become a solid team, and they use each other's backgrounds to not only learn from each other, but use each other's expertise to kind of get to the bottom of things, I think they're going to discover a lot more. And so I was pretty excited about this episode. And then, like I said, when I saw that they were at Mohegan Castle, I thought, this place is gorgeous. And I can't imagine the grounds and everything. Of course, we start off the show where Grant is talking to Daryl and Kristen, who are the co-leaders of the team, and kind of telling them a little about where they're going and what's been going on. He introduces them by video to Shayla and Jimmy Landell, and how their castle is built on ground that a Lutheran church was on, and that it was burnt to the ground in the late 1800s under kind of mysterious circumstances. And beside the church, there was a cemetery, which still is there, and that Shayla and Jimmy feel like it could be creating an atmosphere that the employees aren't real comfortable about being around. And then to find out that not only did they do a video, that Shayla wrote Grant separately and stated that things are getting worse, and that she believes something possibly could be targeting her family. And that got me even more interested. My family lives over in Ohio, and I have drove up 77 quite often, and I've never been over Southwest, but I have heard about the Mohegan Castle and have always kind of wanted to see it. Of course, I immediately stopped the episode when I saw it and wanted to see if any other shows had been there, because it just looked so familiar to me. And as I was looking to see, had Ghost Adventures been there before? Had, ghost hunters been there before? Had Paranormal State been there before or something? Well, no. I have to admit that I absolutely love Gordon Ramsay. And they were actually on his reality show in the third season, Hotel Hell, where he came and was trying to fix hotels that also had, restaurants in them. And that's where it looks so familiar to me from. But Mustafa, as they're driving through, had already did some research on the place and talked about how Jacob Henry Hyde established the first Lutheran church and that it burnt, and that the cemetery is obviously still on the property. And then we see a family meeting and we get to actually meet and hear Jimmy and Shayla. And Jimmy talks about how his dad bought the property and how as he grew up, he'd always been kind of fascinated with castles. And he slowly kind of built a section at a time and then would put stone around it and then start building somewhere else, build another turn or build. And that after a while, his mother just kind of suggested that they needed to turn it into a hotel. And it became a hotel in 2002 through my research. And I like that Grant says, exactly where did the church burn at? And Jimmy said, well, it sat in the yard near where we are right now, over next to the cemetery, and it's about 150 feet from where they were actually setting. So that was a little shocking that he decided to build the house, that close to where church burnt, even though he owned more land and could have put it elsewhere. Jimmy then starts talking about a history of fires. And he talks about how the weekend before Mother's Day, their restaurant was actually burnt down. And he says now that the fire alarm keeps going off and the fire department can't figure it out. And he even admitted that it does freak him out some. I guess the one question that I wanted to know is he used the very words, a history of fires. So I really want to know, what exactly did Jimmy mean by that? Because when you say you have a history of fires, that usually means more than one. And he really told us about the big one where, the restaurant actually burnt completely down. I wanted to know more as far as where else have there been fires, at what time periods. Were there fires before his dad started building the castle on the land? And when his dad started building the castle, did that become when the fires actually kind of started happening? So, I didn't really get those answers, but Kristen and Grant and Daryl ask about the different experiences that they've been having. And they tell him about, in December, there were guests that were parking, and the parking is down near where the cemetery is. And as they were parking, the lights kind of hit the cemetery, right? And they saw a young girl wearing a blue sundress. And when they got out of the car, they looked for her and they didn't find her. I don't know about you, but I'm probably not going to go look for a young girl in a blue sundress in the middle of winter at night that I see through my parking lights in a cemetery. There's a lot of holes in that story. I don't know about that, but they said that she's a pretty common sight around the cemetery, and that a lot of times she tries to hold people's hands. They believe that her name is Samantha, and that she is actually buried in the cemetery, and they show her gravestone. Now, they talk a little bit more about her later in the episode, but I guess my main question is, what leads them to believe this? What put in their mind? They show the cemetery. It is not a small 10-plot cemetery. It's not humongous. It's not Arlington National Cemetery or anything like that. But it's not what I would call, little or small. So what led them to this particular girl, and why? When they show her gravestone, her initials are on it. And so how exactly did they know her name was Samantha, and how did this get started, I guess, is what I want to know. Then they start telling them about the Macbeth Cottage, number 13, and how when Shayla had been out there, she had heard a little girl laughing in her ear, and that they had guests before feel like blankets were being pulled off the bed. They turned on a light, and they saw a soldier standing at the foot of the bed. And again, I guess just really unusual to me, a lot of people see spirits or ghosts at the foot of their bed, and when they go to turn on the light, then they disappear. So real unusual for this story to be told that they didn't see it until they turned on the light, and when they did, then they saw the spirit. And she described how it slowly almost burned away. And that just, I don't know what to think of that. I really am not sure. And then they talk about how there has been seen, it's a common sight all over the property, but in the Macbeth cottage, there is a woman with white hair, and some of the guests have seen her. And then they go to the restaurant, and they go over, to the kitchen, and they meet an executive chef that saw the woman with the white hair. And he said that they made eye contact, and she flew across the room to him, and then just suddenly disappeared. And then they talked to the prep cook, who walked out into the dining room and saw a woman in a white gown with glasses, and then she kind of disappeared. And Jimmy and Shayla are very kind of adamant, but especially Jimmy, that they want whatever is here gone. And they don't want people to be frightened. And I don't blame them. This is their livelihood. This is where they live. But this is also a hotel. This is where guests come to enjoy themselves, to relax, to eat in their restaurant and everything. So I can understand them feeling that way. Grant has to, though, kind of tell them, I've got to figure out what's going on. And then my team and I have to kind of try to see if we can figure out why that is happening and kind of almost debunk it, if they can come up with some kind of natural solution to it. And then if they can't, they need to determine whether it's paranormal, whether it's, not normal, and then is it safe? And if it's not safe, can they make it safe? And he kind of makes sure that he goes through this with them. And they act like they're okay with that. They act like that is something that they're, kind of okay with. And I was kind of shocked. I thought they would maybe press them for answers. But somewhere along the lines, there was a team meeting held, or Daryl come up with this idea since he was there with them on his own and kind of ran it by Grant. We didn't really see that. But Grant arranges for Brooke Sagard, and they describe her as a forensic sketch artist, to come in and sketch what the different eyewitnesses have seen, what the front desk clerk has seen, what the executive chef has seen, and what the prep cook has seen. And I can go ahead and tell you, I was a little interested. I've never heard of a forensic sketch artist. That's not really her actual title. But Brooke Sagard is real. She graduated from Tiffin University with her master's in crime analysis in 2008 and forensic psychology in 2005. She has a bachelor's from the University of Cincinnati in 2000 in criminal justice, and she has worked for the Delaware County Sheriff's Office since 2001 and has been an analyst for them since 2008. And when you look her up, part of her job description for being an analyst is doing eyewitness sketch art. And so she is for real. I wish we would have got to see a little bit more of them describing, but when she gets done, you can tell all three sketches are different, but yet they are similar and could very well be the same person. And I kind of wonder, I guess, what led to that, what made them think of that, and why did they do that. I also kind of wonder why they never showed the sketch art to Jimmy and Shayla or around town. And I wonder if anyone actually maybe at one time knew this woman or knew her story. So, I mean, that was a question that I kind of wanted to know and wanted them to explore a little bit. And then Brandon gets to the part that I kind of have been waiting on. And he talks about how they're going to actually kind of use two new pieces of equipment. And the first one that he talks about is a binaural microphone, and it will pick up any EVPs, and it's kind of like having superhuman hearing. I've seen this on another paranormal show, and I wasn't sure of it. I'm assuming that it has to amplify the sound and really enhance it. And so that's the only thing that really kind of makes me, I guess, leery of it. But anyway, Grant kind of puts Daryl in charge of this, and Daryl makes the decision that Brandon and Mustafa will be in the cemetery, while Brian and Rochelle go to Macbeth Cottage number 13, and that Grant, Kristen, and himself, Daryl, will go looking into the restaurant. So we head off at 10:03 to the cemetery with Brandon and Mustafa, and I am really starting to like them. I like them as partners. They play off of each other really well. They have two different trains of thought, and because it almost seems like Mustafa is more willing to open his mind up and kind of consider different things and feel different things, whereas Brandon is more black and white. They really come together almost like yin and yang and form a complete team. And I enjoy their chemistry. They're teasing each other and really trying to get to the bottom of things and questioning each other and everything. So during these 4 episodes that I've watched, I've really enjoyed them as a team. Again, they directly go to Samantha's grave. And this is where we find out that she died of typhoid fever, and then her mother died 10 days later. And so I guess I'm still wondering, because they don't answer the question, why are we concentrating on this? Why are we not trying out different areas of the cemetery? Why are we not going over to where the parking lot is and seeing if we can see anything? Why are we not setting up maybe a stationary cam to film and see if we see anything? I question little things like that. They decide to use their new piece of equipment. Brandon is wearing headphones, and Mustafa's going to start off speaking, and he's going to see if he can hear any voice or any movement or anything like that that may answer Mustafa's questions. But this is where they introduce us to what they call a data logger. Now, this, I want to use some big, great word, and the only thing that I can think of is this is just really cool. It records temperature, vibration, EMF, pressure, and humidity, and it does what it says. It logs the data. It logs the change in the temperature, the pressure change, and everything. And then afterwards, you can pull it up on the computer, because they do later. And you can see where the data fits and where there's different discrepancies, where things are going up and some things are going down and everything. And I really, really, really think this is cool. I looked them up, and it seems like it depends on whether they plug into a computer or they can run on a battery, or what you have them do. You have them just do humidity, or if you have them do a lot of different stuff. It looked like online they run anywhere from $40 to design something that has all 5 of these. Looks like would run you $600 or $700. But this seems really cool, and it seems almost scientific to me. And that is what I'm interested in. That's what I'm kind of searching for. So as Mustafa is asking if a little girl likes playing with the guest here, Brandon does hear a voice through the headphones. And then we see the data logger kind of beep. And Mustafa says, hey, we definitely need to make sure that we review this section of the film and the tape and the recording and everything, and see what we're going to hear. I'm going to be real honest with you. I didn't hear anything. But I didn't have headphones on like Brandon did. But I I didn't hear anything. And he describes it almost as being a whisper, as being very quiet. And so as they ask questions, the light goes off on the EMF detector section of the data logger. And so it, from watching previous paranormal shows, of course, leads me to believe that this is an intelligent haunting, and I kind of wanted them to do some additional experiments with this, to spend a little bit more time on it. And maybe they did and they didn't get anything. I'm not sure. But I did want them to experiment maybe in different areas of the cemetery, or with different questions or different techniques, or something like that. But then we jump over at 10:41 p.m. to Macbeth Cottage, where we see Rochelle and Brian. Brian has a thermal camera, and Rochelle lays down in the bed, and of course Brian's not picking up anything on the thermal camera. And I'm thinking, well, number one, you haven't been there that long, so you're not going to immediately just pick it up. But number two, the couple that told Jimmy and Shayla the story said, they were under the blankets. They felt blankets being pulled off of them. And she obviously wasn't under the blankets. She obviously wasn't asleep. They didn't find out what time this was, so maybe it's something that is residual that happens or that they see on a regular time basis. So little disappointed, I guess, with Rochelle and Brian in this area. And then we see Brian go over to a mirror, and he says that some guests have seen a soldier in this mirror. And this is news to me because I didn't hear anyone say that. So I am kind of wondering where they got that story. But we hear Brian talk almost to the mirror with the thermal camera pointed at it, and telling the soldier that he also was a soldier for 10 years and that he understood him. And it was a kind of opening that we got to see in Brian, almost like Brian was trying to make a connection. And then it almost immediately jumps over to 11:19 in the restaurant. And Grant and Kristen and Daryl are walking in. And it's 11:19. Now remember, Mustafa and Brandon started at 10:03. So I kind of want to know what Grant, Kristen, and Daryl have been doing for the last hour and a half. Have they been watching cameras? Have they been trying to figure something out? Have they been setting up equipment? What have they been doing? I always wonder, what are people doing when they're not around? So they decide to set up each of the 3 sketch pictures that the sketch artist made and put data loggers in front of them. And then 2 of them sat at the table, and it appears that Kristen is almost nervous. She doesn't sit down and kind of, I don't know, is fidgety almost. Grant explains to any spirits or ghosts that are in the area who they are and the devices, and how, they can touch them or they can manipulate them to make a sound. And then they all hear a moan, which I found kind of unusual because, again, I didn't hear a moan and they didn't replay it. And I think that's what got on my nerves. I thought, if all 3 of you heard it, surely you guys would have replayed that 50 times so that we could have heard it. But I replayed it several times on my DVR, and I never did really hear a moan, and it's not presented in the reveal to Jimmy and Shayla. So I found that kind of unusual too, that they heard a moan, but yet it wasn't caught, I guess, or something, because they didn't present it. So we then get a bonus episode. And it's not timestamped though. But Rochelle and Brian are actually down in the cemetery. And at some point when they were in the cemetery, Rochelle had promised to bring toys. So she did. She brought up light up toys to try to get interaction. So Brian set the recorder down on Samantha's headstone, and Rochelle explained it, that, if her or another spirit wanted to talk, then this would hopefully capture it. But then she told her that she had brought her light up toys, and that she was placing the balls also on the headstone, and she moved them around so that the light would light up. And she said that they weren't like normal toys, that as soon as you touched them that they would light up, that they weren't easily lit up, that you actually kind of had to move them. And they ask not a lot of questions, but they ask a couple questions and they get no response. So I'm assuming that's why they kind of dropped this scene from the original episode. But I'm shocked that they didn't stay down there longer. They didn't try it elsewhere. Again, I wish ghost hunters wouldn't go in with a real set mindset where they think it's this, and if it's not, then something else may not, be creating it. I don't know. I get frustrated with that, I guess. But then we see Grant, Kristen, and Daryl move into the kitchen. And Grant says that he's going to use a technique called gossiping to see about the white-haired woman. And he explains that sometimes when there's other spirits or entities around, that they'll talk about each other. Well, that totally makes sense to me. That's totally logical to me. I'm not sure who come up with that concept, but that does make sense, because, when you're alive, you do talk about people. So I don't understand, if you're dead, why you wouldn't talk about them. But he asks if anyone has seen this woman. And if you have, then touch the machine near the pig, touch the device near the pig. And two of them go off. And they just happen to be the two sketches without the glasses. And so he asks if they are the same woman. If these two pictures are two different women, or are they of the same woman? And again, the lights go off. Now, I'm really impressed with Grant, because I always point this out in episodes. Grant, we actually see him switch the pictures around, and we see him switch the machines around. And so then he asks that if the picture that has the lady in glasses, if she would be without the glasses, is it someone they recognize? And all of the devices go off, almost like crazy. And Grant says that there's the possibility of having an intelligent entity here. Well, again, I wish they would have played with this a little more. Obviously, they had a spirit, a ghost, an entity, whatever you want to call it, there. It would answer questions. I wish it would have showed them asking more questions and getting some response. But there again, maybe they did and they didn't show it, or they didn't put it on the screen, or they didn't explain it. But all of a sudden, at 2:57, Grant kind of wants to call it a day. And we're going to end, night one's investigation. Now, at the beginning of day two, Grant says that he needs to bring in some fire inspectors, and he wants to bring two of them in to look at the fire alarms, and that two previous guests have came forward and they have additional info that we might need. Now, when Grant says this, I almost immediately think, well, that's a great job, Grant. I can't believe that you're having two fire inspectors come in and kind of make sure that they both come to the same conclusions. But then we find out that that's not really what happens. The fire investigators go together. Now, we'll talk about that in a minute, because what they do is they start off with the two previous guests. They have Rochelle and Brian talking to them, and we meet Joe and Courtney Crickbaum, and it was their wedding night, and they started to hear some noises in their room, and then Joe felt rubbing and kind of tickling around on his feet. And Courtney felt like someone was watching her, and she sat up very quickly and she saw a figure at the end of the bed. So again, we have in the Macbeth cottage a figure at the end of this bed, and I just don't understand why they didn't set up some stationary cameras. Like I said, I just kind of wonder if maybe that's a residual haunting that comes through and they couldn't have picked it up. I really wish they would have done that. But then we see Daryl meeting Steve Ambrose and Williams Farnsworth, and they are the fire inspectors. Now, I will say Williams Farnsworth looks really young for his age. I don't know how old he is, but he looks really young. And I really thought that Daryl was going to say, you start here, you start over there, and don't really talk to each other, but go about doing your fire inspection the way you want to and give us a report. And I thought that they would kind of see if they matched up. But they actually, I guess, came together. They actually maybe worked together or whatever, because they started doing their inspection together. After the inspection, Steve kind of takes charge, the older one, and he says that the wires all over the house are correct, and they have no idea why the fire alarm would be going off, that there's nothing loose, there's nothing wired wrong or anything like that. So then we see a night 2 team meeting. And Grant says that because it's raining, that the cemetery has now become off limits. And he feels like there's activity here, meaning, the castle, the restaurant, and, well, in the cottage, and how he really wants to concentrate here. He wants to see, is it dangerous, and he feels like they really need to focus in on this and keep investigating. So they decide to put Brandon and Mustafa in the castle, and then Rochelle and Brian in the restaurant, and then Daryl and Kristen are going to go to the Macbeth Cottage number 13. Well, again, this leads me to ask, Grant, where are you? What are you doing? Are you at some kind of base camp and supervising? Are you touching base with walkie-talkie? Are you talking to somebody? Are you getting something set up? What exactly is Grant doing? But we see Brian and Rochelle at 11:07, and they also brought the sketches in to the restaurant kitchen area to see if it brings activity again. Brian starts asking questions, and before really anything can happen with the data loggers or anything like that, Rochelle says that she is starting to smell gas and that she feels like her head is starting to hurt. And she said, I'd like to go step outside. And she asked Brian if he can gather the stuff up because she feels herself getting kind of dizzy. And so Brian obviously gathers the stuff up, and we see them walking, and Brian's saying we need to go find Grant and let him know what's going on. Well, that's me. I want to know where Grant is. Where are you guys going to go find him? Because when we see them talking to Grant next, he doesn't look like it's that far away from the castle. And Grant asks if they checked to see if the pilot lights were on. And they both state no, that the smell was kind of getting overwhelming and they just kind of wanted to get out. So Grant does the logical thing and says, I think we really need to get in there immediately, because the family's already lost one restaurant from burning down. I don't really want to see another one get burned down. So he makes a call to Daryl. And so we see Grant, Daryl, and Brian come and check things out and want to make sure things were okay. But in the meantime, they, show Mustafa and Brandon at 12:16 going to the Landau suite. And when they walk in, both immediately feel the heat. Brandon notices that the fireplace is blazing when they walked in. He asks very little questions. You can tell that the heat is getting to him. He tries to take what he calls a sweep of the suite, and as he does, he finds that the heater on the landing is also on, and how this is an issue. We immediately flash back, though, to Brian and Daryl and Grant checking out the restaurant, and how Kristen says she needs to go outside. Grant then gets on the radio and tells everybody they need to have an emergency team meeting. And Grant says, it's been a really weird night. Let's kind of call it a night. And we see them going off to review film. We don't get a timestamp on any of that. The last timestamp we get is of Brian and Mustafa at 12:16. And I thought that was weird, that they didn't explore that. That, they find that the pilot lights were out. There were 3 of them out. And they don't know how they came out. They obviously can smell the gas. We have Mustafa and Brandon finding a fireplace ablaze and the heat turned up. And they don't really put any cameras in there. They don't let things run. It's almost like they don't explore things. And I start wondering, well, does Grant, with all of his experience, somehow have this figured out? And it's a mystery, and I haven't been, Sherlock Holmes and figured this out. So what we do is we get Grant and Kristen and Daryl coming in where Brandon has a computer hooked up. And he says that he feels like this is the most they have gotten so far of any places they've been. Brandon shows them the film of Mustafa's personal feelings where he feels like someone is possibly around him or sitting near him, sitting in his lap, and how the EMF goes off. And Brandon then shows them the data logger where the temperature drops at that moment, the pressure drops at that moment, but the humidity spikes sky high. And I find kind of all of that fascinating, but they showed none of that to us. They didn't show the context that was in. They didn't show what questions they were asking. I like that we got to see the computer and we got to see the different readings, and I loved how Brandon matched it up in the film where Mustafa was having a personal feeling, and it's like the data logger backed that up. But I really wish we could have saw the context that was in. And we go into the reveal and the findings, and they kind of skim over things. They explain, the sketch artists and how they use them, and they show them the pictures, and then they show them Mustafa and Brandon's audio and the data logger showing where the atmosphere changed. And they told them about the fire inspector's report, about how everything was wired right and everything was okay, but how Rochelle and Brian smelled gas, and they found out that there were 3 pilot lights out. And then Mustafa and Brandon going in and finding it over 100 degrees in the Landau suite with the fireplace and the heater both on. And I'm thinking, it's really weird that they found the fireplace and the heater on, but because they didn't have any stationary cameras already set up, because they didn't have any outside cameras set up, we don't necessarily know that anyone wasn't in that suite that started that fire or that heater. And because it was so hot, it was over 100 degrees, Brandon even says at one point they had to open windows and doors to get it to cool down. We didn't see any of that. We didn't see them question. We didn't see them investigating. That really confuses me. And they talk about the 3 pilot lights being out on the stove and that possibly causing gas and everything. Well, did the fire inspectors check that? At no point did we see them in the kitchen checking that. Is an alarm supposed to go off on that? Because I've never heard of that. So why would a fire inspector check that? So why didn't they bring someone in to find out what had happened there and if everything was okay? I just feel like we didn't really explore this. I felt like this investigation was kind of choppy. I know it's a big area. There were a lot of buildings to investigate. I wish they would have had a more concise plan. I wish they would have peppered the area with cameras and really broke down film, and possibly came to some kind of conclusions and explanations. Because at the end of this, Grant says that he recommends that they try to prevent fire as much as possible and kind of make it a fortress so that fire can't penetrate it, because he can't come up with any solutions. And he says, I really want to come back. Well, yeah, I want you to come back. I want you to stay right now. I don't understand why you start filming at 10 and, at 2:57 on the first night, you're ready to go. I I don't get that. There's, what, 7 of you guys? Are you saying you can't investigate, for 7 hours and you guys break down some film together? What is going on? I didn't think this was one of the best episodes. This turned out to kind of be a disappointment. Yes, the data logger was super cool, but I also noticed that the audio device that Brandon was so excited about, they never used again. Why didn't they use it in the bedroom where the soldier was? Why didn't they use it maybe to communicate with the woman with the white hair? I just feel like there's a lot of holes, and it's no wonder Grant wants to come back. I would like to know the real story on this. I would like to know if he was rushed, if directors or producers were rushing him, that they had to get out of there, or maybe the family couldn't not have guests for a period of time and they wanted them to hurry up. What exactly went on here? When I started researching Landau's Mohegan Castle, it is a 3 to 4 star hotel. It has pretty good reviews. In TripAdvisor, in where I read TripAdvisor, I did not see any reviews talking about haunting or seeing anything like that. They do offer haunted history tours. It's on their website. You can look it up. And they're given at 8 p.m. only in September and October for $25 a person, and you get 1 hour. And they kind of tell you the history of the house. They take you out in the cemetery and tell you the history of Samantha, and they kind of tell you about the restaurant burning down, because that is located on the website. You can read that for yourself. However, if you click the menu button, you'll see that they do offer ghost tours. And they talk about the haunted history tour, but they also talk about ghost hunts or paranormal investigations. And this includes a tour of all of the active areas, exclusive access to the grounds, an indoor location to set up with equipment, which we never saw ghost hunters do, where their base camp was or where they set up equipment. Access to the pool house if available. We never saw a pool or a pool house or had access to that pool house. Never saw that. Access to the tunnels under the castle. This totally shocked me. There's tunnels under the castle that if you go on a ghost hunt or a paranormal investigation and you schedule it through them, you get access to these tunnels. Why didn't the new ghost hunters go down there? Was that checked by the fire investigator? Is that causing any issues or problems or anything? It also says access to our private 230-year-old graveyard, the Hage Cemetery, and then it states that the cottage, the Macbeth Cottage, number 13, is the most haunted location on the property. And it is also available to investigate for an additional fee. And it talks about how the normal ghost hunt or paranormal investigation, whichever one you would prefer, is $65 per person. However, if you want to investigate the most haunted location, which would be the cottage, they start out for $199 on weekdays. But the ghost hunt, like I said, that includes all active areas, exclusive access to the grounds, an indoor location to set up your equipment, access to the pool house, access to the tunnels under the castle, access to our private 230-year-old graveyard, is $65 a person. That's not bad. Paranormal equipment is available if you need them. Guided hunts are also available upon request. Access is for a minimum of 10 hours. And so I find all of this fascinating. That you actually could go and investigate this place for 10 hours, get all the locations besides the cottage for $65 a person, and have it for 10 hours. You could go from 8 to 6 in the morning if you wanted to and really investigate. What we saw the new ghost hunters do was basically investigate from right around 10 p.m. and they were quitting between 2 and 3. And I think part of it is what led to me feeling so disappointed in this episode, feeling like it was choppy. I feel like what they did was great, but I don't feel like they followed up or followed through. And if they did, then they didn't get anything because they didn't put it on camera. Because we all know, had they got something outstanding, it would have been shown in the TV show. So that leads me to believe that if they did other things, if they tried other things, they asked other questions, they went other places, they didn't get anything. And I'm sorry, after reading through this, the pool house and the tunnels not even being mentioned, not even being explored, just really throws me off. I'm starting to feel a little leery about the new Ghost Hunters. The first episode I thought was kind of cool. Like I said, it was at the high school and they debunked some stuff and they had some real interesting experiences. I was new to their way of doing things. Second episode was, the states and Tony supposedly are all of a sudden starting to want to sell when research stated that he'd been trying to sell that house for almost 10 years, that he had asked $1 million for it and he had dropped the price significantly. I want to say under $400,000. So I'm starting to almost question the new Ghost Hunters methods, whether they actually explore things and explore different possibilities, try different things, ask the questions that need to be asked. I almost wonder if they played it safe in season 1, if they don't want to push that envelope. And I don't want to think that about them. I really don't. But I am a little disappointed in this episode. Like I said, I don't know any other word for it. I just feel like it was really choppy. I felt like it wasn't a fluid investigation. I didn't feel like they worked together as a team. I don't feel like they justified anything. The things that Brandon and Mustafa found at the cemetery, Rochelle and Brian didn't. the things that Kristen, Grant, and Daryl found at the restaurant, Brian and Rochelle didn't. I just feel like they definitely need to go back here. I feel like Grant did. I feel like they definitely need to give this one another try. Let me know how you feel. If you guys watch this one, kind of give me your opinion on it. I kind of want to see if it matches up with mine. If you guys have any questions, comments, problems, or protests, you guys know that you can write me at paranormalreviewpod@gmail.com. Yes, that's singular, paranormalreviewpod@gmail.com. Hit me up on the Paranormal Review Facebook page or the Paranormal Review Twitter page. Tell me what you're thinking. I am really interested in seeing what you guys think on this one. And I'm not sure what show we're going to do next. I really am not. I know a lot of you want me to go back to Ghost Adventures. And yes, I always want to go back to Ghost Adventures. That's who I started with, and they are like my homeboys. I feel comfortable with them. But I am also very fascinated with Destination Fear and the Holzer Files. But I know there's some new shows out there, and do we want to try them? And I know last time we tried Haunting in a Heartland and it didn't turn out great. Should we give that another try? I don't know where we're going to go next. But this one, for me, kind of a bust. But anyway, I will talk to you guys soon. Don't forget to leave a review on podchaser.com. And like I said, write me with your comments. I'll talk to you soon.